Ric Flair, woo! Let's go, babies. And this trend is continuing of having difficulties having people join the U.S. military. I've got a lot of stuff on it. I'm going to make a bunch of videos on why I think this is. But we're seeing what I would believe is probably the lowest strategy of begging. So they're saying military leaders urge Americans to help them overcome, quotations, misperceptions of military service. Now, misperceptions is an interesting word to use, but they use the quotations. If you seek a life of purpose and passion, you can find the connection and more in the armed forces. If this was tea, I would drink it because there's a lot of things that we could unpack with that I think are very important. Cheers. God. This guy, if you're this guy, you're crying right now. I'm sorry. You got your little ball cap. You're officially a sailor. She's crying too. It's okay. I never cried, but I won't judge you. So it says, in a direct attempt to get more young Americans into uniform, the military service's most senior civilian leaders took a place they apparently believe young people love to frequent, the Wall Street Journal's opinion section. Can we appreciate that not a single person that they're trying to recruit is reading the Wall Street Journal opinion section? Like, they've banned TikTok for obviously, there are perfectly legitimate reasons of security concerns, all those other things. But the fact that, like, you're so out of touch, you're going to the Wall Street Journal. And I would say, if anything, that is feeding into the narrative of wokeism that people are talking about, where you're going to these media sources which are not trusted by many anyway. So you're pairing along with mistrust military, mistrust of Wall Street Journal and traditional media. It's not going to get any better, man. It's not getting any better. Christine Wormuth, Frank Kendall, and Carlos Del Toro, the Secretaries of Army, Air Force, and Navy, respectively, stated the obvious in a recent op-ed for the Journal. That's the military is facing a generational recruiting shortfall. Now, to give you guys some insight on this too, there's recently been an article that was released talking about how bad the U.S. Army is having with recruiting, which they were the worst. And it's crazy because they were also the biggest, right? So they are not as affected as compared to something like the Marine Corps, where they have a smaller branch, or for example, the Coast Guard, if you want to count them as a branch, Space Force, all those other things. And so I have to sit here and say, on top of that, you also have people out there that are saying that compared to every other branch out there, the Army has seen an astronomical increase in suicides, which should be noted, compared to every other branch, as some of the ones in the other branches went down. And I don't know how much COVID would have had a factor of that, but that should be considered as well, because I think people went through some rough stuff. As the civilian leaders of the Army, the Navy, and Air Force, we joined to ask every young American to consider serving in the U.S. military. Asking, okay? The senior leaders wrote, if you seek a life of purpose and passion, if you hope to invest your talents in a cause bigger than yourself, if you want to belong to a community of people who are also choose to serve, you can find that connection and more in the armed forces. Now, I do believe there are people out there that find themselves like a need to serve. There are some people that have this like pseudo conscript, everybody should have some active service. I believe there's a million other ways to serve. This is one way. If you want to help people out and be part of something bigger, yes, you can do this, but you could also serve a soup kitchen and help homeless people and try and get people out of bad situations such as domestic violence or, abuse or whatever else that would also be a serving nature, that would be on your own terms, but obviously there are benefits and stuff, with each one of those. I think that passion is dying. I believe there's a lot of negative press and perception that's come out about the military, which they have not done a good job on a public affairs front across the board, and it has been botched beyond oblivion as we see contradictory statement after contradictory action after contradictory statement. And that, I would say, was so evident in 2020 with Captain Crozer, where you saw how that went down, caring for sailors and all that kind of stuff. And you just repetitively see it. Vanessa Guillen, all these other things. Like, it's not like we're talking about stuff that's 10 years apart. We're talking about stuff that's like multiple times within 1 year that we people in the military and the leadership and everybody needs to have some buy-in to try and make this better. And obviously I understand there are people at the top that have accountability, people in the middle, the bottom, everybody's a part of it. I'm not going to just, point up the entire time. The crux of the article is not necessarily new. U.S. military officials have said for months now that the challenges they face in recruiting are unlike any they've seen in decades, which I believe we'd be looking back at the Vietnam era during the draft and all that. It says challenges that include a declining interest to serve, an inability to meet the physical fitness and academic standards of service, a growing economy, and overall declining trust in government institutions. I will say, let's break those few things that this author, I'll give credit to her real quick. We're talking about Haley Brzezinski. I think is how you say it. Valid. She's trying to look at every slice of the pie. But my personal opinion, looking at why this is, okay, declining interest to serve, which would include inability to meet physical fitness standards. I would not put that as number one. I don't think people are like, I can't run, dude. I don't think anyone's going to admit that to themselves, even though, yes, we've seen increase in obesity and all these other things. Okay. And then academic standards of service. I don't want to say that ASVAB has like astronomically increased either, where people are sitting there like, man, I can't make the ASVAB score. Yes, it does filter some people out, which it's supposed to, right? That's the job of this test. I don't think that's keeping the majority of the people out. I really don't. Unless the school system that people are being filtered from is somehow changing, which I'm like, that could be a systematic problem, and that is a whole other bag of worms in college. And yes, I digress, okay? A growing economy. Yes, there are other opportunities. That is very much so. I will say that is a valid choice, as dear military, paying people what you're paying them to work over 40 hours, they are going to see other opportunities where, God forbid, microwaving stuff at Applebee's is going to be about the same. Yes, it's not the benefit that they might get, or you look at Starbucks, who is giving benefits and paying about the same. You have to look at that and say, man, we're competing with Starbucks, right? Like, they want to be a Fortune 500 company, kind of like that, and work as a top organized, reliable organization. There are some drastic things as a culture that are going to have to change if they want to meet up with that as well, okay? And then the last thing says, overall declining trust in government institutions. I would say there is that, and I would put that as number one. I think that is just, not just politically, just in general, incentives that we're seeing and how people act. And like I said, there's contradictory statements versus what's actually happening. So let's see. It says, first, the article sits behind the journal's paywall. Okay, yeah, that's why I'm not paying for it. Available to newspapers paying subscribers, of which the average age is 43 years old, which I said nobody's going to read that. So yes, they don't know their audience. It is tone deaf. According to Dow Jones Profile, considering that a growing portion of young Americans get their news from TikTok, which the Pentagon is generally loath to embrace, or other social media sites, this seems like something of a public affairs misfire. It has been a misfire. It's been a misfire since I've been making videos on this platform. The issue with military content as we speak right now is they are lapsing in judgment of what is currently happening today. And what we're seeing is that the military is trying to either be some kind of official news source type thing where it's like, look at the Blue Angels, so great, and then they try and give out informational videos, right? Which you appreciate. They get Business Insider and these people from third parties to make pieces about it. And I understand that. So they're not having to deal with as much of the labor intensive things and kind of creating that. But they could do that themselves and control some of the narrative if they wanted to, but they just aren't good at it. They are so much sitting back in like 2015 to 2017 where people wanted the types of videos that they're now making now, like 5 years later, and now they're gone. So that's how I look at that. I think it's out of touch, out of date, not just with this, but it's been out of date. And it says, but more importantly, The journal op-ed also appears to put at least some of the responsibility in the overcoming its recruits' challenges on parents, teachers, community leaders, lawmakers, religious institutions, and military veterans, offering a few specifics on what the secretaries themselves are doing to make the military more attractive to recruits. It says, quotations, "The military can and must do more to recruit and retain America's finest." The op-ed says, "But we need America behind us." Here's the deal. You need America behind you. But, and I know to divide military and political sides of this, I want to look at this and say, Afghanistan, right? When people look at how that happened, how many members had their lives taken or were injured that day, and how that was executed, and how that's perceived, and how I feel like everybody in the media had this narrative to say it was such a good, outstanding thing and just focus on the blinders of how many people were evacuated and things like that. And we're not seeing how, that is affected now and all these other things that are going on. And so I look at that and to retain people, it's going to be hard. And I say that because they were giving recruits $50,000, right? I would say if you're going to give a recruit $50,000, why is it the people that are asking to be kept are now only getting like 20 something thousand or, less than that or whatever? I say, why? I feel like it should be the other way around. That other person has provided more value than the person that is coming straight in. They haven't proven themselves one single bit. I digress. It says, a Gallup survey this year shows that like other government institutions, the percentage of Americans who have a, quotations, great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the military has been on a decline, reaching the lowest percentage this year since 2000. Similarly, a Pew Research Center report published this year revealed a 14-point decrease in those who say that they have a, quotations, great deal of confidence in the military, falling from 39% in 2020 to 25% in 2021. Now, I don't want to go on total speculation, but I also want to go on some facts, right? Like I mentioned, you had Stuart Scheller, the Captain Crozier situation, how COVID was handled, and I continue to go back to this. They showed their cards. They showed their intent. They showed that they're playing political games. They showed that they are willing to buy into these types of things and not have the backs of soldiers. We had 60,000 people kicked out, which was selective. Certain people got to stay. Some people didn't. There are people that I know currently that got to stay while others were forced to leave. There was a girl that didn't wear a mask that was forced to leave. And it really showed they didn't have an idea. They pandered into it and they didn't know how to back out. If they wanted to back out, they should have said everyone can stay. And that's why we're seeing now it's almost November. There's not a COVID requirement as far as vaccines, and that is a dead issue. They want you to forget about it. So yeah, but it said, while it's difficult to tell exactly what's behind the decline in confidence and whether or not it's due to external factors, I think it's pretty easy to understand. It is no secret that there are internal issues facing the services that are potentially driving future recruits away. And I think the external factors are just media in general that are coming out and saying, we see information where this doesn't make sense. And we are not asking what I would say even critical questions. I would say these are basic questions, right? Basic. But it says, at a time when negative experience for service members are easier than ever to share through social media, which is why the cat's out of the bag. It sometimes seems that the military is still struggling to keep up. Take, for instance, the multiple incidents of contaminated water over the last year in the Navy or the Army's efforts to address multi-barracks for soldiers. The secretary said that in the op-ed that the military is, quotations, investing billions of dollars in housing and quality of life, but do not go further than that in offering specifics of what that looks like. There are also ongoing efforts by the Defense Department to address sexual assault, harassment, and suicide throughout the ranks, which will result in probably more training and people that are going to have to click through and say, don't do this anymore. We're tired of talking about it, right? That is what we're going to see. And the contaminated water. We're now on our second instance, which I have not covered on this channel at all, but there is another ship dealing with contaminated water that I think at least laid the groundwork and the way at how you should probably do it because they did it so horribly over on the first carrier that we noted this. Now, when that came to play, they were like, It's water's good now. We checked it, and then like the next day backpedal. It's actually not good. We're still finding traces. People are still leaking stuff, and the only people that are advocating are the people on the ship. It's blown up, right? Then you look at, I believe it's called Red Hill in Hawaii, where those people are screaming from the rooftops trying to get their point annotated, and again the military's like, shut up, shut up. And then, yeah. And yes, they may throw billions of dollars at these, barracks and things like that. But I, as many of you understand, that a lot of these contracts that would be put into building these barracks are going to be competing to get the most amount of money, which is a cultural issue because they're government contracts, and win that over for the least amount of effort in order to make it work. And they're like, well, these barracks don't really look that great. Guys, we're going to do beautification. They're going to use that word, beautification out there. And what they're going to do is they're going to be like, we're going to paint it. We're going to paint it. It's going to look great. Awesome. We'll throw carpet over the old carpet. And it says, in May of this year, Warmoth told Task and Purpose that the Army needed to do more to address concerns about service for Generation Z, which would be like retirement and the eroding benefits that we're seeing, as I'm going to release a several part series talking about every pillar at which the military has gone wrong in the past 2 decades to erode at what we thought it would once be. And it just doesn't surprise me anymore that we're at these low numbers. In quotations, I do think we have to both get the positive things out there for the Army, but also, frankly, we need to show that we are doing something about sexual harassment and sexual assault in the Army. Wormman said, instead, we need to show that we are doing something about suicide prevention in the Army. It says military leaders have been working on those issues, but details about those efforts weren't offered in the general op-ed because they continue to flounder on them, I believe, in my opinion. The secretaries instead wrote that there are, quotations, misperceptions, sorry about that, misperceptions about the military that might keep people from joining, but did not provide specifics, adding that the military is offering, quotations, unparalleled training and educational opportunities and changing policies that are more in step with what its generation has come to expect. Let's digress that, okay? So, training and educational opportunities. I will say, if you talk to most people that are in the military right now, and you said, what training are you getting that you are going to be able to use outside the military? The military is going to show you something called US MAPS. And I'll tell you this right now, it's an apprenticeship program where you log your hours. There are some that, okay, it could get you a job. I would say it's enough to pat on the back. You're going to put food on the table, maybe be able to live somewhere, and it's enough. You know what I mean? It is definitely not a thrive when you get out, and I believe they do just enough to justify it. And granted, you do got to put some effort out there, but I don't think anyone's out here saying, man, my training opportunity set me up to go work at Google or Apple or, where I think a lot of the Gen Z people want to work at if they're going to do one enlistment get out, which there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, and I mean, I think if anything, it's becoming lackluster. People were getting very mad at the sergeant major of the Army because he got rid of the shark attack. And you look at stuff like, things that are becoming politically correct, where I think people are like, I want to join that part of the military. And I believe that's why we see this certain type of person that's joining the Marine Corps, for example. They want to do tough stuff. So yeah. What the next generation has come to expect is pushing the military to make big changes like beards. Come on now. According to the 2021 Gallup survey, Gen Z expects ethical leadership, which I agree with, a diverse and inclusive organization, and employers who actually care about their employees' well-being. I would add to that not only just, diversity and inclusive, everyone wants to feel part of the team. I would say parentheses, quotations, whatever you want to put around it, based on merit. I see a lot of people, it doesn't matter if none of this is based on merit. That's my issue. I feel like a lot of these things, people feel like they're being evaluated on things that aren't even related to their job. So looking at this, it makes you feel like I'm getting paid to do this or this, which is not even really related. Like Marines and Army, they're like, I shoot once a year. That's what my evaluation or my promotion's on. That's crazy. My job over here, you know, and then the Navy and probably the Air Force selling cupcakes and doing all this other stuff. You know, that's not my job. If I want to be Betty Crocker, I would have went to baking or culinary school. And by the way, can we also justify for 1 second? I'm going to bring this up. How much money was put towards these studies that were being conducted that people were having to gather this intelligence or this information? Because like I said, contracts are at a premium for the government. And so when you look at this, you have to sit there and say, man, it's almost like common sense. They could have just read some of the basic Facebook comments. They could go to Reddit. They could go to Instagram. They could go to TikTok. They could go, ask people at the military bases, right? But it says, but an honesty and ethics rating from Gallup last year found that public perception of senior officers had hit a new low after declining 10% since 2017. That's primarily due to an increasingly sour view held of military brass by Republicans, Gallup said so far that the view held by the GOP of military officers in 2021 was the lowest Gallup had recorded since the first reading in 2002. I'm baffled that their Gallup has done this report and they're putting the blame at Republicans now as to why we're seeing issues with the military. I don't think if you asked a lot of people in the military that they would think that this is a political issue. I would say it's a probably bipartisan issue that I don't think you would correlate specifically. Like when you saw Captain Crozer, when you saw Stuart Scheller, you could have asked people from the left, the right, or whatever their affiliation was. I'm sure there wouldn't have been an issue. But it says falling trust in senior military officials among Republicans who are generally more trusting of the military than Democrats is apparent in the recent trend of conservative pundits and lawmakers criticizing the military as, quotations, woke. From cable news talk shows to lawmakers in congressional hearings, Republicans have increasingly called out military officials over the last 2 years on policies focused on diversity and inclusion in the force, the very policies Gen Z reportedly prioritize. That is difficult because it's not taking into context also where you notice, for example, Tulsi Gabbard, which has left the Democratic Party, for example. I'm not trying to get too much into politics, where she's even talked about she left because they were so much war pandering from Democrats to help the Ukrainians. So if you're going to sell this idea of let's go to Ukraine, let's support them, let's do everything we can to be involved, but then you're not focusing on the military involvement of what that takes, that seems kind of out of touch. It seems like a conflict or, some kind of mismatched hypocrisy of what you would expect out of the military. So, but it says, in the article's conclusion, the secretaries urge parents to hear them out. Man, so they're not targeting these kids, they're targeting parents that are 46. Okay. What we're doing to make the military even more of a place for the next generation. They urge lawmakers to support them as we work on solutions and veterans to tell your stories of service to the greatest nation in the world. Now, veterans have told their stories, right? Veterans have told their stories on the Sean Ryan Show. They've told their stories through TikToks. They've told their stories on Instagram. They've told their stories over and over and over again, and people are seeing trends, right? You can't expect people to leave. Like, there's a reason people leave the service. The phrase "you quit your boss" is a phrase for a reason. So why do you think most people are getting out of the military? Is it because the pay? I don't really think so. I mean, it's great to have extra money.